All right, now that we have our project set up, we're ready to start in on the next section. So we're going to keep this pretty basic, and we're going to go ahead and texture a ball. So we're just going to start with a sphere. You can either access that through the creation menu, or if you're on the poly modeling shelf, you can go ahead and just click the sphere here really quick. If you just want to grab it as fast as you can, and we can go ahead and bring that into our work area. Now, what we're going to need to access here is the UVs, and we're going to go ahead and export these over to Photoshop to do some basic Photoshop work. You can access the UVs by being on the modeling menu set and going over here to the UV menu. So that's going to be the location we're going to find these at. If we go into UV, we can select UV editor and we can pull this up. This way we have access to the UVs for this object. Now, in order to see the UVs, you need to be able to select the object. So let's talk about moving the editor. The editor's like the hypershade. You can kind of just click the window to move it. You can also scale it down if you need to make it smaller, move it off to the side. That'll be an easy way to work. Talking about the anatomy of this menu set, over here you have a newer feature called the UV Toolkit. It has a lot of the editing tools in the menus placed in a different location. That's a little bit easier to access. Basically, everything along these menus is located here in these various tabs. So just kind of a different way of approaching things. I use a combination of both. Back in the day, this is all we had, so I have a tendency to come up here for a lot of things. But there are a few things over here in the modeling toolkit I really enjoy. These various panels are different ways of viewing our UVs, and we'll explore those later on. But that's essentially what's going on here. So we'll explore that on an as-need basis. But what I do want to show you is if you don't have an object selected, you don't see the UVs. So in order to see the UVs, you need to make sure that the object's being selected and it's being selected in the objects mode. That way, this will come up here. Okay, so now that we have that selected, if we want to kick the UVs out of here, we can use this little camera icon to create something called a UV snapshot. A UV snapshot is going to save out the UVs as an image file that we can then take into a 2D editing software package like Photoshop and essentially color on top of them. So that way we can see where our information is being mapped. If you go ahead and click on this, it's going to pull up the UV snapshot window. The first thing we're going to want to do is set a location, which we can do through the Browse section here. The location we want to set this to is going to be our source images folder. All right, so we're going to go into the source images for this one. Let's go ahead and click that to access our source images. Notice it's not currently set to my project, or at least it's not located at my project. So the nice thing is having this set to the desktop, I can find it quickly, navigate to my section 3 project folder, and go into the source images folder here to place this inside of here. Now, I usually like to create a subgroup, especially if you're going to be creating a larger project. So in the off chance you are, I'm going to right click with my mouse, select new folder, and I can create a new folder in here, and I will just name this ball. I can then double click into that folder just like I'm on the desktop, and I can select a name here and save this. So I'm going to name this ball _ UV, and we'll just click save. Now that doesn't actually save your file out, it just saves the pathway. We need to use these to set up the resolution for the texture itself. For the image format, my preferred format is going to be JPEG. Everyone has different preferred formats. I like the JPEG because it works really well with the blending modes to give us options inside of Photoshop. Now, a big one is going to be texture size. So texture size is one of those things that we absolutely have to discuss when it comes to 3D. Texture size is how big your image is. And essentially the size of the image is going to be equal to the quality of the texture itself. But put more simply, it's how close you can get to the object before it looks bad. So the idea is if you have a larger texture, you have more pixels, you can get up close to it. This is divided between games and film. When we look at the game side of things, games are generally going to be working at a lower range. So I work in mobile, so our start point often is 256 by 256 with a cap at 512 by 512. This is really low end, and this is bound to change. So in the near future, these will probably be obsolete. But a lot of the work I do is within this range for mobile games, and we kind of cap out at 1024 times 1024. Now, I'm also working on a PC game, and in the PC realm, I'm producing textures at 2048 by 2048. Now, at this point, you might notice a pattern. Every time this increases, it doubles. All right, so it's going to go 2 times the previous amount. So this is kind of the spectrum games operate in. And when you get over to film, you start to get a lot higher. For example, 4096 is pretty common in film. And then I'll just put a plus sign here because they can keep going depending on the production that you are making and the needs of that production. So the difference between games and film is games tend to be more limited, film tends to be unlimited. Now, what's the trade-off here? Why are games smaller? Why are film bigger? The reason why is data. It is the size of the file and the amount of time it takes to process it. So when it comes to the lower end side of things, the game side, these are all textures that are really light. They don't take up a lot of data and the computer can process them quickly. But when you get over to film, they can be so intense, you can't even view them in the viewport at all. You have to use the rendering process to see them, and that's the only way to preview them at all. So just be aware of that. For our first project, let's keep it simple and work at 1024 by 1024. You're welcome to work higher if you would like to, but just so we can get through this quickly, I encourage you to use 1024 by 1024 as it will result in faster render times when the time comes. If you need to adjust that, you can just click in here and type it in, and just type in 1024 by 1024 and make sure that's set in both of those. If you want to get this out of here, what you need to do is hit apply. And once you do that, it will save your file out to your project. So let's go ahead and hit apply, and that will save out our file. Now I've already clicked the button once, so I'm going to overwrite mine, but that will get ours out of here. I can go ahead and close this out now. I'll leave these UVs up for reference, but we can go ahead and hop over to Photoshop now and we can open these up. So I have Photoshop open here. Let me go ahead and navigate to our project file and opening it up on another file browser here. Remember, it's going to be in our source images here and ball. You may have two UV squares like me. Don't worry about that. You're going to want to grab the one that has information in it. This is because Maya thinks that the UVs are going outside of the bounds, which might be true, but I'm not worried about that. You can go ahead and select this and just drag and drop it into Photoshop here, and it will create a new document. Now, what's cool here is this is good to go. It's the right size, and we can just start mapping this to the surface. Now, talking a bit about UVs more in depth and how they operate, essentially what you're seeing is the object unfolded into two-dimensional space. All of Maya's default objects are unfolded for us, and you can see when I select this, the various cuts in white. Now, if you don't see those cuts in white, it's this toggle here to view. This is going to go ahead and make it so that the UV seams are going to be seen in white. Now, we're going to get into this jargon a bit more once we get into creating our own custom UVs for our own custom models. But just to understand how the process comes together and works, we're going to take a look at this with basic primitives. That's the idea here, but we'll be able to make these manually later. So with that in mind, we can think of this as a representation of the sphere here. So let's go ahead and build out a very simple texture for this using our shapes. One of the things you want to do is unlock the layer here. You can see it's currently locked, and a way to unlock the layer in Photoshop is to just double click it. If you double click the layer, it'll pull up this prompt to create a new layer, and you can name it if you want. I usually just leave it at the default and hit OK. From there, we can go ahead and select our active color. So I'm going to change my color with the active color down here. And I'm going to go ahead and make my ball maybe blue. I think that'd be a fun color. So I'll come in here and select blue. Just find a nice baby blue for our ball. From there, we can access the shape tool like we did in the practice exercise to draw in a shape to fill in the square. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in the shape here and just fill in the entire square with a rectangle. All right, and now we have some blue. Now, it might be nice to see our UVs on top of this so we can kind of see how everything correlates. So we can go ahead and drag our UV layer up so that way it's on top of our rectangle. And we're going to go ahead and introduce something called blending modes now with these layers. One of the really powerful aspects of Photoshop, besides its layers, is the ability to use blending modes to blend the layers. Blending modes are basic mathematical operations that alter the way color interacts with other colors. We can access the blending modes at the top here, and they will affect the layer we're selected. You can tell it's selected because it's going to be the highlighted layer. In this case, it's highlighted in light gray with my user interface layout. There's all sorts of different types of blending modes, and we'll explore these as we go. The two useful ones when operating with UVs are going to be the screen operation, which is going to add this on top of the other object. Speaking mathematically, white is equal to 1 and black is equal to 0. So what happens here is when we add white, it just stays pure white. And when we add black, it goes invisible, right? Because anything added to itself is going to be itself, okay? So that's what's happening mathematically with a screen. We're adding blue to 0, therefore the end result is blue. Now, if we do subtract, it's the exact opposite. If we take 0 away from the color stays the same. But if we subtract the color, then it removes it. So what we end up with is a black grid or a white grid. And this is why I like using JPEGs, because you can kind of prefer which one you want to use based on the brightness of the texture you're creating. Since this texture is a bit lighter, I feel like it's easier to see the subtract here. So I'm just going to set that UV layer to subtract. Now, in the off chance you want to stay organized, you can also double click on the layer name to name it. You'll see if I double click in there, just like the outliner in Maya, we can name that UV and hit enter. Okay, so this is not very exciting. It's just a grid with blue in the background. So let's go ahead and add something to make our ball a little bit more interesting. I'm going to go ahead and add a stripe running across here. Now, to go with complementary colors, I'll go ahead and use blue and orange. I probably should change the value. Maybe I'll make the value a bit darker on the orange here, and we'll hit OK. And coming into the shape tool here, it should adopt my new color and I can draw a shape across here. Now, since I have the UVs here, I could count these to figure out how many of these I have to find kind of an even space. So I'm just going to see where the midsection is here. And right around here is our midsection. So maybe somewhere around there to there is going to be where I want to create this. Just kind of eyeballing it. You can use your fingers. I've already lost track of it now that I turned off the tool I was using. But there we go. We can draw that across there and have our stripe. So once we have this set, we're ready to hook it up and preview it. We're going to go to File, Save As, and I'll save this out here. You'll see it's already set to our source images and ball. And we're just going to name this ball underscore color and hit save. And that will go ahead and save out a color map for our ball. And it's in the form of a Photoshop document we can edit. Now, coming back into Maya here, we're ready to explore how to set up our texture and how to set up our materials. So if you remember, we're going to do that through Hypershade. And we don't want to use that Lambert 1 because it's going to apply to everything. And I promise you, if we map the UVs to a sphere, to something like a cube, it's going to look pretty funny. So try it if you want to, but I advise you not to put it on Lambert 1. We're going to go ahead and create our own material for this. Now, we're also going to create something other than a Lambert. So to up our game a little bit, let's go ahead and explore this one here called a blinn. So B-L-I-N-N. So go ahead and create that blinn, and we can apply this to our model. To keep things real simple, I'm just going to use the middle mouse drag and drop technique here and place that on top. Now you're going to notice that the blinn is a little bit different than the Lambert because we're going to have this little shine right here. So the blinn material is going to introduce another property that we haven't explored yet called specular shading or specular reflections. What that means is that the object reflects light. It has highlights. So we're going to explore that more in depth when we create some maps to control our specular. But let's go ahead and start by just talking about the color section here and the common properties. You'll notice that the common material properties of the blinn are identical to the common material properties of the Lambert. So you can think of a blinn as a Lambert plus a new specular channel. So everything we could do before with the Lambert, we can still do with the blinn. We just gain a little bit extra control here now that we have these channels. To stay organized, let's go ahead and name this ball material. That way we don't lose track of what this is. Ball underscore material. And we can hook in our textures. So if you remembered in the first section, we utilized the color here to drive our color using a color picker. This time, we're not going to do that. We're not going to use this section. We're going to use this little section here. This is the input section, and it allows us to input information. If you go ahead and click on that, it's going to pull up your creation window, and we're going to look specifically for the file here. Now, if you can't find file, you can type file into the search box and it will go ahead and search it out for you. But that's going to be what we want to grab. So feel free to click that, or if you need to, you can type in file. That way you don't see all of these. We just want a normal file. We don't need a PSD file, so just a normal file. Go ahead and click that, and that will link this in. Now, you'll notice that file changed my properties view here. and it switched to a file section. This can be a little bit intimidating at first, but to simplify it for you, all we really care about is this section here that says image name and this little folder. What you want to do once you've attached your file node is you want to click on this folder here, and this will bring up your source images. And this is one of the nice things about using a project folder. Since this is already located in your source images, you can see it's going to be very easy to access the ball. This is the Maya project folder at work. It's set up to use the source images as the directory for any images being sourced from outside of Maya into Maya. So all of our textures go into the source images folder. If I click into ball now, we can see the color Photoshop document and we can click open. You'll notice that our texture has changed in the preview, but not in the viewport. So what we need to do is we need to turn textures on for our viewport. This is off by default because textures can be very taxing on the rendering system. And if you're creating an asset for something like film and you're working with really high texture resolution, it's not uncommon for your computer to tank in performance and lag, or in some cases even crash. I have had that happen working on high-end assets. Now, the icon for this is this little ball here that looks like a checkerboard, but you can also press the 6 key on your keyboard to turn on textures. So if you go ahead and press 6, it will turn the texture on for you. And we can see how that's being mapped to the surface. Now, you'll notice there's some unfortunate aspects of this, perhaps, which is that my UVs are currently seen on the surface. I did that intentionally as a reminder for you to turn off your own UVs, but also to show you that if you did want to turn the wireframe into a design, you could actually incorporate that into the textures, which is pretty neat. Another thing we're noticing is that this stripe is pretty big. I don't think I want it to be that thick because I might want to add a little bit more detail to it. Let's go ahead and make some adjustments. I can hop back in here to the Photoshop document. For the rectangle, I'm going to go ahead and make that about 2 units wide. I can drag my UVs above it to see this. And I can hold down the Alt key to scale it inwards towards itself. If I don't want it to scale uniform, I can hit Control Z to undo that. And I can hold down Alt and Shift to distort it towards itself, like so. I can then turn off my UVs here and save. And if we come back into Maya here, we can update our texture. You'll notice it hasn't updated yet. The secret to updating the texture is actually using the attribute editor. Now, this is one of the really weird things that I hope they change some point in Maya, but you kind of have to use the attribute editor and the property tab inside of Maya. We could potentially refresh it through the property tab by relinking it, but what I find to be most useful is to come up here to the attribute editor. And when you have the attribute editor pulled up, it is the same thing as your property tab plus some. So if we click the ball material over here, this is where I clicked, you'll see that it's the exact same thing in the property editor. Now, what's interesting here, though, is we gain access to this thing here called sample. And the trick is to double click that. If you double click that, it refreshes all connected textures. And we can see that now has that updated look. So now we have a nice little ball with a stripe on it inside of our scene. Okay, so as a challenge, what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and create your own ball, set up your own texture for it, and feel free to get creative. If you want to do a striped ball like me, feel free to do that, but go ahead and add a little bit more to it. And I'm going to do that once we get back from the pause here, kind of take you through the process of adding a few more things and also discussing some of the challenges that we face with UVs. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and try it out on your own and then come back and we'll go ahead and resume. Okay, so let's go ahead and resume. We're going to go ahead and add stars to this. I want to add a couple little stars, maybe running along the top, running along the bottom. We can achieve that with the shape tool here. If you come over to the shape tool, you can access this. And we can utilize a shape down here called the polygon tool. So we're going to go ahead and change some settings. I'm going to come up here and change the sides from 6 here. We're going to go ahead and change that to 5 and see what it gives us. If I recall, this should give me a star shape. It's been a while since I've done this, but we can try that out. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and draw in with it to see. It didn't give me a star shape. It actually gave me a pentagon. So let's see. Okay. So what we can do if we don't want to get that pentagon is over here, you can see in the dropdown, we can switch this to a 5-point white star, and that will actually give us a star here. Now, I don't want it to be white though. I do want that 5-point white star, but I want to change the color, and I'll make it the same orange as my stripes. And I'm just going to hold down Shift to get a perfect star here and just place that into the scene. Now from here, I can use my grid to kind of guide me on the size of this, how big I want it to be. I want it to have about one gap here, probably between here and here. And this is taking up about 3. I could go ahead and duplicate it across. If I see the gap here, it's going to have maybe 1.5 between these. So I'm just going to Alt-click to duplicate this. And I'm going to hold Shift to drag. We'll just kind of give it 1.5 gap there. That way it's going to be somewhat even. And I'll just resume this process over here, just to 1.5 gap. That looks okay. Now this is going to leave me a pretty big area here where we're not going to have any stars. So I have the option to either make these stars bigger, and I might go ahead and do that by just kind of centering them and pressing the Alt key. So that way they're a bit bigger. Well, that should give us okay spacing there. I'll just go ahead and leave them on top to make things simple. I'll turn off my UVs and we can hit save. So if we go ahead and hop over here into Maya, we can click our ball here and we can see we have those stars applied. But you might notice those stars don't quite look the way they do in Photoshop inside of Maya. So what is going on there? Well, when you convert a 3D object into 2D space, you often have to deal with things like UV stretching and UV compression. So UV stretching and UV compression is where the objects either appear stretched or squashed depending on the shape of the object. So since this object is a sphere, it doesn't exactly translate one-to-one between 2D space and 3D space. So what Maya's done is it's used some stretching to make that fit. What we can do is we can either use special tools that allow us to project and kind of ignore this, or we can just compensate for it. So my star is a little bit too wide this way, which means that it's being stretched to the side, which means I need to essentially squash it in. So I can do that inside of Photoshop. We can hop over here to Photoshop. And if we select multiple of these and we use the manipulator box here, you can see we can move those together. We can also hold down Shift to squash them together. And I'll just click off of this tool. Actually, I don't think I need to click off this tool. I think it'll let me save. Sometimes it doesn't like you to. You'll see that it wants you to apply it. If I clicked off the tool, it would have applied it. But we can go ahead and refresh this, and you can see now that helps that look a little bit more uniform. Now, it's still not perfect, but for this first project, I think I can go with that and like it. So let's go ahead and take a look at this and maybe add in a few more stars of our own to just kind of fill in the gap here. I'm going to Alt drag these and then just pull these over one at a time to fill in the space. And that should give us a good amount of stars there running across the top of our ball. So I'll go ahead and save, and we can see these stars going across the top like so. We could decide if we want to add some to the bottom. It might be a little bit too busy for that. Also, I might want to turn off the stroke on these stars. It looks like they have a little bit of a stroke. I'm going to just come into the properties tab for each of these, and I'm going to turn that off because I don't want to have that dark stroke on there, but that'll give me a basic texture for our ball. So that's how Photoshop and Maya are going to be interacting most of the time, is going to be through this process of texturing, where we're using Photoshop to come in here and edit a 2-dimensional texture and mapping it to the surface of our ball. Okay, so once again, that's going to be achieved through the UV editor here, mapping with the hypershade and linking into the file. Remember to save your project. So we've made a bit of progress here. We're going to want to come up here to File, Save Scene As, and just to stay organized here, I'm also going to create a subdirectory in the scenes with a new folder. I'm going to name this ball, and I'm going to create a subfolder inside of here. So a new folder here, and I'll go ahead and name this Modeling and Texturing. That way, this is separated out for when we build a rig. I'm going to double click into here, And I'm going to go ahead and save this ball. We're going to go ahead and save this as ball 01, since it's our first iteration, and click Save As. Make sure to save yours before moving forward. Okay, so hopefully you had a lot of fun putting some color on your ball. Let's go ahead and explore how we can utilize texturing to modify this even further by changing how the surface looks.